cover story tonight, a spy spat that may take the world to the next war. At least that's what the British press fears. 24 hours after the UK blamed Russia for poisoning a former spy and double agent, it has decided to expel 23 Russian diplomats. They have a week to leave that country. British Prime Minister Theresa May stood up before the House of Commons today, yet again, to make that announcement. This was after Moscow rejected a deadline set by London to explain itself. Yesterday, the British government had said that former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned by a military-grade Russian-made nerve agent.
Under the Vienna Convention, the United Kingdom will now expel 23 Russian diplomats who have been identified as undeclared intelligence officers. They have just 1 week to leave. This will be the single biggest expulsion for over 30 years, and it reflects the fact that this is not the first time that the Russian state has acted against our country.
As she said, this is the biggest expulsion of diplomats by the British in more than 30 years. That is the biggest since the Cold War ended. That's not all. The UK has suspended all high-level diplomatic contact with Russia. The British government has withdrawn an invitation to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to visit that country. Also, no British ministers or members of the royal family will attend the Football World Cup, slated to be held in Russia later this year. The UK government will now bring into force the power to detain people suspected of hostile state activity at the borders. This power was previously limited only to suspected terrorists. London will also increase checks on private flights, customs and freight from Russia, and will freeze Russian assets if there's evidence of them being used to compromise British security. Yesterday, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov had denied all charges by the British government, claiming that London is, quote-unquote, acting out of political drama rather than launching a serious investigation into the poisoning of the former Russian spy. Facing pressure from the opposition, Prime Minister May has also ordered an unprecedented diplomatic escalation. Britain has called for an urgent meeting of the United Nations Security Council to discuss this attack, as they put it. A statement has also been sent to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, slamming Russia for its role in the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, Georgia, and, of course, the Syrian civil war. Meanwhile, in Salisbury, the town where it all began, the police have cordoned off more sites that could have been potentially contaminated. People living in the area remain anxious, understandably. Authorities have been issuing regular alerts and warnings. Hundreds of people who might have been exposed have been told to thoroughly wash their clothes and personal belongings. If this case wasn't bad enough, another Russian exile has been found dead in his London home. 68-year-old Nikolai Glushkov was discovered dead in his apartment by friends. The cause of his death is not clear yet, and London's counter-terrorism unit is investigating this case. Police also said that they found no link between Glushkov's death and the poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal. But the man's profile is worth dwelling on. Glushkov was a close friend of Russian businessman Boris Berezovsky, who had fled to England back in the year 2000. Berezovsky was found dead in 2013, 5 years back. He was one of Putin's biggest rivals and critics. At 2 and 2, the investigation continues. But coming back to the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, the United States and many Western nations have condemned the nerve gas attack. British Prime Minister Theresa May addressed the House of Commons in the strongest words and issued Moscow a 24-hour deadline to respond to her charges. But what exactly are these charges? Senior Foreign Editor Padma Rao takes a look.
The investigation isn't over, and the attacked father and daughter are still in critical but stable condition in a UK hospital. But barely hours after the nerve gas attack on Russian double agent Sergei and his daughter Yulia Skripal in the UK town of Salisbury, the accusations flew thick, fast and sharp of none other than the well-spoken tongue of British Prime Minister Theresa May. The brief statement began with a call on the House of Commons to do the right thing against an attack which was directed, quote-unquote, against the United Kingdom. Prime Minister May also promised that what Ms May was going to say was based on solid evidence. Mr. Speaker, I share the impatience of this House and the country at large to bring those responsible to justice and to take the full range of appropriate responses against those who would act against our country in this way. But as a nation that believes in justice and the rule of law, it is essential that we proceed in the right way, not led by speculation but by the evidence. Puzzlingly, and after declaring that she recommended proceeding not by speculation but by the evidence, Ms May told the House that the UK's investigating officers were working to, quote, sift and assess all the available evidence, unquote. Then she began to list details of Novichok, the nerve agent reportedly used in the attack.
It is now clear that Mr Skripal and his daughter were poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent of a type developed by Russia. This is part of a group of nerve agents known as Novichok.
Now comes the parts of Miss May's statement which, to quote US-British poet T.S. Eliot, had begun with a bang but from this point began to taper off with a whimper. Miss May bases her statement upon what she calls the knowledge that Russia had previously produced the agent Novichok, that Russia was still capable of doing so, that Russia has a record of killing defectors, and that, said Miss May, led to her government concluding that it was highly likely that Russia was behind the act. There's more uncertainty ahead in Prime Minister May's statement.
Either this was a direct act by the Russian state against our country, or the Russian government lost control of its potentially catastrophically damaging nerve agent and allowed it to get into the hands of others.
In other words, the only concrete confirmation that Ms May had in her hands when she addressed the House was a forensic report confirming that it was Novichok that was used in the attack. And after presenting it briefly, Ms Theresa May turns puzzlingly to a tirade of other so-called offences and attributes them to, quote, Russia's behaviour, unquote. Ms May speaks of Russian state aggression. She chooses Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, its role in the Donbass, its violation of airspace, cyber espionage and meddling and hacking in Europe, and incredibly offers a simulated video of Russian attacks on the United States as the nail in the coffin of evidence that it was indeed Russia behind the nerve gas attack in Salisbury. Ms May says that the nerve gas attack could mean either that Russia has lost track of who laid hands on the nerve agent it created, or, and here it comes, that it intended a direct attack on the UK. Then comes a warning that isn't as well veiled as the British Prime Minister may have intended. The PM suddenly recalls the UK's strong commitment to NATO and how it is at the forefront of the NATO-Russia eyeball-to-eyeball standoff in the Baltics, notably Estonia. And Ms May winds up with a rumble about employing more extensive measures. And what is the world supposed to conclude? Some critical sections of the UK media have picked up this startling un-Sherlock Holmesian deduction of 1 + 1 is 3, the allusion to NATO's Article 5, which calls for the use of force in case of an armed attack on one of its member states, is described scathingly by one UK media house as hot air. Everybody needs to calm down, writes The Spectator. No sane person can think that to call up NATO is a sensible response to a murky crime in Salisbury. If Britain appeals for Article 5 in response to this case, it would suggest we have lost the plot, unquote. Russia has rumbled back and warned the United Kingdom to not mess with the nuclear weapon state by making aggressive accusations. Ms May has expelled 23 Russian diplomats. In all likelihood, Ms May will next take the tried and tested path of imposing sanctions. But whatever she does, and 2 weeks ahead of Russian elections, Mr Vladimir Putin will be even more assured of an election victory. Padma Rao, WION.
In the words of Alice, it gets curiouser and curiouser. Meanwhile, Russia's close ally Iran has been under intense scrutiny and pressure. It's been at loggerheads with the US. It has been fighting with the Arab neighbours. It is still recovering from the tough sanctions, economic sanctions imposed by Europe and the US. And during this period of global isolation, it was India that came to Iran's aid. Delhi's investment in the Chabahar port came as a much-needed respite for Tehran. Last month, India made another exception to bypass those sanctions. Indian companies could pay the Iranians in Indian rupees. It was hailed as a very, very special gesture, but now Iran has responded, and how? Its foreign minister has opened the doors of Chabahar for China and Pakistan, putting India's investments and interests there at risk. Our next report decodes the googly by Tehran.
Iran seems to be the new front for the ongoing regional power struggle between India and China. Almost a month after Iranian President Hassan Rouhani paid a visit to New Delhi, his Foreign Minister Javed Zarif sat down with the Pakistani Prime Minister Shahid Khaqan Abbasi in Islamabad. During this meeting, Iran extended an invitation to Pakistan and China to participate in the development of the Chabahar port. Zarif went a step further. Not only did he back Pakistan on the Kashmir issue, he also expressed Iran's willingness to participate in China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Zarif's invitation to Pakistan comes less than a month after India and Iran inked a lease agreement for operational control of a part of the Chabahar port. Tehran's offer to Islamabad seems to be a balancing act. During his 3-day visit to Pakistan, Iran's foreign minister tried to address Pakistan's concerns over India's investments towards Chabahar port. The minister made it clear to the Pakistani establishment that the port project is not meant to encircle or strangulate it. Pakistan and Iran have maintained strong ties since 1947. While relations have become strained at times due to sectarian tensions, Pakistan still wants to attract investments from Tehran. Both sides want to take bilateral trade up to $5 billion. While the foreign minister's statements have been less than welcome in India, they aren't surprising. Iran has been considering joining the CPEC project for some time now. Joining hands with China will give it access to the east through the Belt and Road Initiative. An energy-hungry China too has been looking for alternative routes to import oil. Iran has 10% of the world's proven oil reserves, and Beijing could seriously consider Tehran's offer to meet China's energy needs. But Iran's overtures to China and Pakistan could potentially upset India's strategic calculations. Despite international sanctions and pressure from allies like the United States and Israel, India has invested millions of dollars towards development of the Chabahar port. The port not only gives India a route to Afghanistan, it also enables access to Central Asian markets. Facing pressure from the global community, Iran is running out of friends. It can ill afford to upset India. Bureau Report, WION.
The Chabahar port is strategically located. Not only does it connect India to Afghanistan while effectively bypassing Pakistan, the port is also a gateway to Central Asia for India. More in our next report.
Iran rolled out the red carpet for the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Tehran in May 2016. Mr. Modi's visit dominated the headlines and the front pages of Iranian newspapers. The historic Chabahar port deal was signed during this visit.
The bilateral agreement to develop the Chabahar port and related infrastructure and availability of about $500 million from India for this purpose is an important milestone.
Chabahar is a strategic investment for India. It agreed to invest $500 million to develop the port, which opens up a transit route for India to Afghanistan and enables access to Central Asian markets. India's investment in Chabahar enabled the 2016 Indo-Afghan-Iran Trilateral Pact. The agreement allowed India to send export grains to Afghanistan at a reduced cost. All this while bypassing Pakistan. The first shipment was sent last year amid much fanfare. Less than a month ago, India and Iran inked another agreement, a lease for the Shahid Beheshti port at Chabahar. India has committed $85 million to develop the port. Iran has now leased the operational control of the Shahid Beheshti port to India for 18 months.
Excellency, चारों ओर जमीन से बंद अफगानिस्तान के लिए और मध्य एशिया क्षेत्र के गोल्डन गेटवे के तौर पर चाबहार पोर्ट को विकसित करने में आपने जो नेतृत्व प्रदान किया है, उसके लिए मैं आपको बहुत-बहुत बधाई देता हूं.
But Chabahar's importance is not limited to exports to Afghanistan alone. It's also being seen as a feeder port to the international north-south transport corridor, which will connect India to Russia and Europe through Afghanistan, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Bureau Report, WION.
India's involvement in the development of Chabahar has been a matter of concern for Islamabad and Beijing. This is mainly due to the fact that the Gwadar port, which is sponsored by China, is barely 72 kilometers from Chabahar. Gwadar, of course, is in Pakistan. These ports have the ability to spark a geopolitical trade rivalry. Experts say that when both these harbours are fully functional, competition will shoot, and with it, potentially, fresh tensions in the region. Iran feels that it needs China and Pakistan to make Chabahar economically viable. Delhi too has been walking a thin line when it comes to its engagements with Tehran. India's oil imports from Iran have steadily declined, hitting the lowest level in 18 months last year in August. New Delhi has enough reasons to rethink its strategy on Chabahar. Soon after the Prime Minister Modi's visit to Tehran back in 2016, Iranian diplomats ruled out exclusivity for India in Chabahar. They never promised India exclusive access or use of that port. Some former Iranian diplomats have claimed that other countries are welcome to bid for future phases. Also, soon after the Indian Prime Minister's visit to that country, Iranian commentators said that Chinese President Xi Jinping was the first major leader to visit Tehran after the nuclear deal with the US, Germany and Russia was signed. Donald Trump knows how to make a splash, but even by his standards, this sacking was dramatic. After months of public bickering with the Secretary of State, Trump fired Rex Tillerson live on Twitter, sending political pundits into a tizzy. Why and why now, they asked. Trump and Tillerson have sparred over everything from the US Embassy in Jerusalem to talks with North Korea. The Secretary even called the President a moron in public and kept his job. Critics say he crossed the line when he said Russia was certainly involved in the poisoning of double agent Skripal. Others say the former ExxonMobil CEO was the wrong choice to start with and may have already done the damage to American foreign policy that could last a generation. Former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer's spelling error went viral as the inadvertent admission of truth. Look at what he said. Others, like Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, say the sacking has undermined the position of America's Secretary of State, and I'm quoting, "Whenever Secretary Tillerson's successor goes into meetings with foreign leaders, his credibility will be diminished as someone who could be here today and gone tomorrow." Sure enough, foreign offices around the world are assessing the impact of this firing on bilateral engagements and checking the credentials of Tillerson's successor, CIA Chief Mike Pompeo. The Senate has to confirm Mr. Pompeo's appointment before he takes office. New Delhi is hoping that happens sooner rather than later. The India-US 2+2 dialogue is scheduled for next month. It will involve talks between the foreign and defense ministers of India and their American counterparts. And this could well be Mr. Pompeo's first big assignment as Secretary of State. This is before he works on the Trump-Kim talks, if they happen in May as planned. Pompeo is also seen as a strong advocate of tough action against Pakistan. He's been making a series of statements asking Islamabad to crack down on terror safe havens and Washington to cut aid. Listen in.
Well, you begin by seeking their assistance. Secretary Mattis is actually traveling in the region here before too long and is going to make clear the president's intent. I think Secretary Mattis will deliver the message that says we would love you to do that. That is, that safe haven inside of Pakistan has worked to the detriment of our capacity to do what we needed to do in Afghanistan. And in the absence of the Pakistanis achieving that, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that that safe haven no longer exists.
We see the Pakistanis continuing to provide safe harbor havens inside of Pakistan for terrorists who present risk to the United States of America. We are doing our best to inform the Pakistanis that that is no longer going to be acceptable. So this conditioned aid, we've given them a chance. If they fix this problem, we're happy to continue to engage with them and be their partner. But if they don't, we're going to protect America. The president has made very clear that he needs Pakistan to cease being a safe haven for terrorists that threaten the United States of America. End, period, full stop.
Fixing the Pakistan problem, as they say, only time will tell. Meanwhile, Mr. Tillerson's exit will impact West Asia as well, where America's role has been under increased scrutiny since Donald Trump took office. WION's West Asia Bureau Chief Daniele Pagani gets you the lowdown.
For one, it surely is bad news for Iran. Pompeo is among the fiercest opponents Tehran has in Washington today. Pompeo has called Iran a despotic theocracy, a thuggish police state, and the largest state sponsor of terrorism. He has spoken about Iran's alleged links to the so-called Islamic State and the Al-Qaeda, warned Iran against interfering in Iraq, and has said that bombing Iranian nuclear capacity is not impossible. Pompeo accuses Tehran of being a major threat to peace in West Asia and American interests in the region, and military expansionism, and wants to counter it at any cost. If Pompeo has not moderated his views, it means that one of the most ideological opponents of diplomacy with Iran may soon be in charge of implementing Trump's efforts to exit the nuclear agreement in May. Unlike Rex Tillerson, Mike Pompeo is a fierce opponent of the Obama-era nuclear deal. He would want to roll it back, a view his boss Donald Trump shares, and which might have cost Tillerson his job at the State Department.
Rex and I have been talking about this for a long time. We got along actually quite well, but we disagreed on things. When you look at the Iran deal, I think it's terrible. I guess he thought it was okay. I wanted to either break it or do something, and he felt a little bit differently. So we were not really thinking the same. With Mike Pompeo, we have a very similar thought process. I think it's going to go very well.
Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has warned the US against pulling out of the nuclear deal.
We need to liberate OIC from political domination by those who are not interested in the goals of the OIC, in the original goals of the OIC. The United States is in no position to either violate the deal or to set conditions for it.
The Lebanese militia party Hezbollah, too, is in Pompeo's crosshairs. Pompeo considers them an Iranian proxy, posing exactly the same threat to the region. President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, too, won't find a friend in the US new Secretary of State. Pompeo is a fierce opponent of Assad's presidency and the Russian and Iranian interventions in Syria. Speaking at the Aspen Security Forum in July 2017, Pompeo said, and I quote, "It is difficult to imagine a stable Syria that still has Assad in power. He is a puppet of the Iranians, and therefore it seems an unlikely situation where Assad will be sitting on the throne and America's interests will be well served." Relations between the US and NATO ally Turkey are at their lowest, and Tillerson's sacking comes in the middle of an unfinished delicate negotiation with Turkey. Pompeo inherits a difficult situation. He will need to take a stand on the Turkish aggression against US-allied Kurdish fighters and address Turkey's requests for extraditing Fethullah Gulen, the man Erdogan considers the mastermind of the failed coup d'etat in 2016. In a tweet he later deleted, Pompeo defined Erdogan's government an Islamist totalitarian dictatorship. Little will change for Iraq. Pompeo is expected to follow the plans of a conditions-based military presence and strenuous intelligence cooperations with Baghdad. The same goes for Jordan, a traditional US ally in the region. The Gulf countries will find in Pompeo, as they did in Tillerson, a stable ally. Particularly, Saudi Arabia shares the same views on Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. Israel might be the happiest of all West Asian countries. Rex Tillerson was a friendly Secretary of State, but Tel Aviv considered his attitude to be too neutral. Tillerson got into his Washington job without previous connections to the Israeli establishment. He had little or no role in putting together the much-awaited Trump-West Asia peace proposal. Mike Pompeo, on the other hand, is known to be a strong supporter of Israel, whose intelligence community shares precisely Pompeo's views on Iran as the major threat. Israel's intelligence minister, Israel Katz, took to Twitter to express his satisfaction. Pompeo visited Israel in 2015 and 2016 and praised Israel's resilience.
The soon-to-be Secretary of State of the United States of America, Mike Pompeo, does not inherit an easy situation here in West Asia. After 7 years of war in Syria, the United States are not sitting on the winning side, whereas Iran, Mike Pompeo's greatest enemy, is. It will not be easy for Mike Pompeo to decide how to counterweight the Iranian influence over the region, despite having powerful allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia. But the first challenge ahead is Turkey. How to go about the relation between the United States and Turkey, which is currently at its lowest. Will Mike Pompeo decide to stand by the Kurdish fighters who helped the United States defeat the Islamic State, or will Mike Pompeo completely abandon them and therefore repair the United States relations with Turkey? Daniele Pagani from Amman, Jordan, for WION.